Hello there. This is our 2-minute and 30-second warning. Actually, 2-minute and 25-second warning. If you want to get a coffee or some dessert or something, go and get your coffee and dessert. We'll try and get started on time, and we'll go from there. So eat up, and if you need some more coffee or dessert, go and get some. It was a great lunch. Okay, folks, here we go. We're trying to stay on time. Everybody's, the good news is we've got lots of good news, but we've got a good break at supper time from 5 to 7, so everybody will have a good chance to visit then. Then we'll have a nice visit with Maxime from 7 till 9, and then we'll have another couple of hours later tonight for some more visiting. So let's do our best to stay on course. We've been thrilled. As you know, Stockwell Day was our finance minister for when I was still going to high school, I think, Stockwell. But in any event, he was our Alberta's finance minister for quite some years. He's been an important part of Alberta politics. Valerie. I know we all love Stockwell, but you can't talk to him when I'm talking to him. That's all. It's all good. It's all good. That's like Valerie Price is here, and she said, like, one thing she says I love about Conservatives, they can laugh at each other and they can laugh at themselves. Like some of these people are too serious, so we aren't, are we, Val? No, we're not too serious. No, but in any event. I don't. If I listed Stockwell's entire resume, I'd be speaking for his whole time. So rather than do that, I'm just going to introduce you to Stockwell Day, a dear friend of Alberta's and a dear friend of our organization. Please give him a warm welcome. Thank you, Stockwell. Thank you very much, Danny. You're welcome.
Well, thank you, Danny, and thank you, folks, for that warm welcome. Danny could make it in politics because he's very prone to exaggeration. So he's got a great future there. And thank you. Let's give a hand to Danny, his team, his dear wife, and everything they do. It's just so amazing. And a hand to the people who prepared the food. That was a great lunch. And whoever, following Danny's remarks earlier this morning, whoever came up with the $8,000 to cover the coffee, that was great, so we appreciate that. Great to be here. I've been taking in the sessions all morning. Isn't it always great to hear John Robson? Man, I just love to sit there, and he's always got a quote that I hadn't, I'm not aware of. Of course, he's far more erudite and well-read and educated, but I never knew, and I'm going to repeat it. Who knew? I guess we should have. Julius Caesar's last words. Did you folks catch that? Great kind of, what was it, and thud? Beautiful. I'm going to quote that often. So great. So we're going to get started here, and I'll tell you who really needs a hand is David here. The dexterity that he is demonstrating going through, we all present and put together slides in a different way, and then we expect him to, be able to get everything going and up there, and so I really appreciate that, and I'm just trying to find my place here now as I talk to you and get you updated. People that we know many of you here are asking, how you doing? Great. Very busy these days, as always, as so many of you are. You've been asking, a couple of you asking about my grandkids, our grandkids. We're still at that low number of 15. I'm sorry to disappoint. And I guess from what I've heard this morning, we're all subject to be arrested because of how they're obviously confounding the environment, 15 grandkids. And one of them, I too late getting the knowledge, I don't know how they're going to fix it, but on the, have short kids thing, my 18-year-old grandson is 6'8", so he's going to be a target of the climate crowd for sure, or maybe his parents for producing that. 15 grandkids. Our granddaughter, one of our granddaughters who got married just down the road here last year, just sent us a little while ago. She loves to send out little text photos and stuff. And I'm looking at it and showing my wife, and I said, I can't, what is this? And she looks at it and she says, you dummy, that is a what? A what? Yeah, it's, the ultrasound photo. And I'm looking at it and I went, oh my goodness, so there we go. We've got... some months from now, you can truly, honestly, without worrying about hurting or inflaming my ego, you can call me great. And I'm looking forward to that. As a matter of fact, I usually when I'm texting back and forth with my grandkids, it's great having that many grandkids, and they talk about DEI, a very diverse group. And I will often, as I did last week, I was presenting to a tech group, and they had looking at some various questions on communication. I just sent out a text to about 8 of my grandkids, asked a couple of questions as far as themselves, their viewing, and their friends, got the answers back, and basically did a report telling this group about the trends of young bloggers and influencers and everything else right from my grandkids. And so whenever I send them a note, we text back and forth, I just sign it GPAW for Grandpa, in case any of you are lexiconically deprived. But now I've got to change it. I'm going to have to put GGPAW, right? Or 2GG-PA, and I realize, hey, I'm becoming my own identifiable group. So it's kind of exciting. I think I'm probably eligible for all kinds of government subsidies and things like that. And I'm looking forward to some bureaucrat reading when he or she asks for my preferred pronouns now. I'll be putting 2GGG-PAW, comma, happy. I was thinking of doing 2GGG-PAW, proud, but of course pride, as you know, is one of the 7 deadly sins, and I'm already fighting the other 6 all the time anyways. I don't need the pride one. So it's getting interesting out there, folks, in how we're defined, how we define ourselves. And I would say over this last year, as I do various presentations of Canada or other places, regardless of the topic, I'm saying we have never before, it's come up already this morning, in the history of the human race, have we lived in a time where governments and adults are actively pursuing changing the so-called gender or sex of kids and through pharmaceutical or surgical means. Never happened before. And so that's the one thing. And also, other than groups like this, the overall fairly muted response to that is staggering. And it's all based on fear. I'm going to be getting into that in my presentation. So, you could be asking me to do a presentation on anything. I start with that, just as a bit of a challenge to hopefully encourage or wake people up again, or a bit if they need that. So on this topic that I've given here, the war on prosperity, and the topic that Danny has put out there in his group in terms of the direction we're headed as a society, is this fate or is it choice? I'm obviously, being an activist, I'm leaning towards the choice part. I'm putting this up here, Dave, to make sure we're coordinated. I think we are. I'm going to try a bit of a balancing act between my slides here and yours. I think we're good. Oh, here comes. Oh, look at that. That guy just anticipates my every move. Thank you so much. Let's see if we can get this back here. Okay. I think that's going to work. Okay. So, you talk about prosperity. Who could oppose it? And in fact, people do. The very notion of prosperity is something that the two groups largely that oppose the sense of prosperity, however we define it, in a material sense or even a spiritual sense. There's the two groups that oppose it. Well, one, those that don't have it, and those who envy those who do have it, whatever the prosperous thing may be. So those of you, I recognize there's some inclination here to some biblical principles and studies. And of course, right from the first family, Cain and Abel, envy was the big problem. And that wasn't even necessarily of a financial situation. That was just envy of how somebody was being perceived, and being perceived by God. And that led to huge problems. Jacob and Esau, not long after that, envy was the problem between those brothers. And as we know, Paul writes, when he's writing to Timothy, he says, godliness with what? Contentment is great gain, and few there are that find it. This drives, envy is what drives so much of the policy that we're looking at and that we're talking about here today. Solzhenitsyn, of course, there we go, said it, our envy of others devours us most of all. This is what's the part of the human condition that drives many of the actual policies that we're looking at and dealing with today, but also in our governments. It's driven by this. And so recognizing that, for most of human history, recognizing that part of our nature, governments, be they totalitarian or otherwise, came up with, following the first little set of rules called the Ten Commandments. That was done recognizing that we've got this envy problem. And if we don't want to steal from somebody, we want to kill them to get it, or we want to just have our own say, but we're envious of those positions. So we come up with codes and we come up with rules. And it's one of the purposes of government, I think most of us would agree here in a limited way, that governments are there to protect the stuff we have from your envious neighbor or business competitor down the street from just straight out taking it from us, from pillaging. Governments, we hope, one of the reasons for being was to protect us from the envy of other, or let's say the actions that can flow from that, but and stop the pillaging and stop people, whether it's taking our lawnmower or our car or our crops or our farmland. But what happens when government becomes pillager in chief? When the people who are the most envious control the government and therefore use as weaponization the laws to allow them to pillage from us the things that we envy, then we've got a problem. And when we're talking about political battles and situations, I try, at least as hard as I can, I'm not always successful, I try to limit my attacks, I'll use that word, on the philosophical or the political position or the policy position of the person. I try not to make it personal. Especially in this day and age where we've got with the young people, I'm talking, I lose track of who are the X's, who are the Z's, who are the Y's, but sort of, 13 to 25-year-old, for some reason, they're not as enamored of really feisty debate that even sometimes involves personal hits back and forth. And you can, I know in dealing with the young people that I have and all their friends, you can lose them in an argument or debate if they think you're just being mean on a personal sense. And if we can avoid that at all, or limit that, it's possible. I know often in the House of Commons, and some people recognize it, some didn't, but I would try and keep my attacks on policy, and vigorous, but on policy. But every now and then, you stand up, and then the person on the other side shouts at you, and then you get a little upset. And the reason people say, how are you able to keep it reasonable? And one of the things I would do in the House of Commons was when the questions would come and everyone would be, shouting, and I always said, politics and House of Commons is interesting because when you stand up, start to talk, you get jeered, you get heckled, you get booed, and that's just from your own colleagues. Then there's the opposition. And so you can easily get distracted. But the thing that more than anything would keep me online was I knew if I got out of line and attacked the individual personally, I'd get back to my office, there'd be a message from my mother. And if I was brave enough to return the call, and I was like the guy in that old commercial, where you almost pray, I got the machine, you didn't have to talk directly. But if she answered, a conversation usually went something like this: Stockwell, why were you rude to that nice man? And I would say, Mom, first of all, with respect, I wasn't being rude, I was being forceful. And secondly, he is not a nice man. But regardless of that, when we're presenting on these things and dealing with many times these are life and death situations, we need to remember this. So when I'm dealing with socialism, for instance, and socialists, I try and stick to the policies that are based on envy, many of them, but it moves from that. The leaders of socialist movements move it beyond that and are able to trap people. And of course, we know what our good friend Winston Churchill said: socialism is a philosophy of failure, the creed of ignorance, and the gospel of envy. Its inherent virtue is the equal sharing of misery, right? Instead of some people having a certain amount of stuff and others have less, we all wind up with less. So convincing people of that, especially young people, sticking to the policies as far as we can, is beneficial. So if there's a war on prosperity, as I believe there is, and I think as you would, who are the combatants and who are the main belligerents in this war? And I would say the belligerents can largely be found in, again, I know we're going to trigger and people are going to say, but largely in academia, largely in media, and largely among the activists of the groups that we're dealing with. Those are the belligerents. And it's important that we note that the activists in every movement, and whether you want to call it in academia or whether you call it in the media, there's the few key drivers of the things that we are bothered by are usually driven by these ulterior motives. But their followers, I have many people, including family, who would proudly identify themselves as socialists. But they are driven by, and the reason they're willing to take positions suggested by their leaders, and even take some hits for that, is because they're convinced that what they're doing is the kindest thing that can be done. And it's because they're very caring for people. They're convinced of that. And full credit goes to the belligerents or the activists. As you know, those of you who like The Art of War and Sun Tzu, he said, one thing you have to do as a leader you have to make sure your soldiers know that, or at least think that they like you. Then you can punish them. But they're not going to take punishment if they think you don't like you. So socialist leaders, and I think some of them are well-intended, but generally, whether it's the leaders in these type of movements, they first convince their followers or would-be followers that this is what's best for them. And then their followers are willing to put up with the pain that results from the policies. What people are willing to put up with in terms of lack just on their own personal purchasing power, for instance, that arises from socialist policies, they're willing to put up with that because their leaders have convinced them, we love you. This is the best thing for you and the human race. And so they have to be dissuaded of that particular position, but that's why they can follow it. And I believe most of us who are here today and those who are watching online, I believe we are driven by a sincere motivation that what we're proposing is actually better for people. And by that, they're then willing, if people are convinced of that, and they know that for a truth, they're willing to stand up and take the abuse. And there's a lot of abuse being doled out these days, as I can tell you, and as you would know, for the stands that we take. But there's so many ideas that people need to be dissuaded of. When I was 12, 13 years old, and delivering newspapers at 5:30 every morning in Montreal, more specifically in the well-heeled neighborhoods of Westmount, I would look at those beautiful houses, and I would kind of say in my mind, you know, someday, either by hard work or luck, I might be able to have a house like that. But nobody was saying to me, thankfully, you have a right to that beautiful home. You have an inherent right, and the person who has that home now probably got it illegally or through some racist mean, and you have a right to have that home. When Val and I were living in Vancouver, we're living mainly in Kelowna now, where our riding was, and also here near Red Deer. I mean, everywhere, every time we opened the newspaper in Vancouver, it was the right of young people to live in the wonderful condos and beautiful buildings right in the harbor, right in Cole Harbor in Vancouver. They have a right to that. Their right has been taken away by all these terrible policies, and they have a right to be there. Well, nobody told me that. What we tell people they have an inherent right to can inflame them to do certain things, either to work harder or to demand that thing be taken away from somebody else and just bequeathed upon them. One of my sons was just giving a seminar on something a couple weeks ago, and I caught a bit of it, and he said when he was 11 or 12, he sat down with me and he said, I want a certain type of computer. They were just coming out, and a certain type of computer desk, and a certain type of bicycle. And I want those. I said, that's fabulous. You can have all three. Wow, thanks, Dad. Yeah, just get a job. Right now, that's somewhat foreign to what kids are taught. You know what? He went out, he got a job, even at the age of 12, and within a couple of years, he had all three. But those are not the things that we are teaching our kids. We used to post on our refrigerator door, a little Bible verse says, we had 3 cents, if a man does not work, he should not eat. Now, that's not disrespect for the poor, because there are poor and they need to be helped, and I think they need to be helped even in better ways than they're being helped today. But the message to our sons was, this is the fridge. Yeah, there's food in there, but if you're not working, you don't really have an instant claim to that food. So these ideas that we're propagating go against the cultural Marxism that our kids, our grandkids, are being faced with today. All of you are well schooled in this, but for some of you online who might be, we are seized today with what we call cultural Marxism. And there's been a reference to Marx, and I think people should get that book, because Marx was convinced, as you know, that those who had capital got it by illegal, irreverent, or immoral means. Now, that's always going to be the case anyway. There's going to be some like that. But the only way for everybody to get what they want, you've got to overthrow the present regime. First, you convince people that anything people have, and this goes back to the envy quotient here, anything they have, they got illegally or immorally or through some racist advantage. Then you convince them of that. Then you can convince people, now you have the right to just go and take that. So that economic Marxism has morphed into what we know as a cultural Marxism, or wokeism, as some of us call it today. So that students on campus, when they see somebody who has anything that they don't have, they're convinced they got it because of racism, or they got it because of favoritism, but not out of things like the dint of hard work or study. When one year, when our boys were all going to school, we had an Asian student stay with us for a year, the same age as teens as my son. We were helping out this family. And they would bemoan the fact that when the reports, that was in a day when they, have you ever heard of report cards? Anybody heard of those? Those were things that used to be used to measure whether you had acquired learning. Kind of a novel idea. And invariably, Gary's numbers, his achievements, scholastically, were always higher than the boys. And they say, well, Dad, he's just smarter than us. Almost leading to the thing about maybe Asians are smarter than we are. I said, guys, let me just ask you something. Most weeknights, where are you? And they're playing basketball, which is fine, or on the hockey rink, or hanging out with their buddies, doing as little as they need to get through. I said, do you know where Gary is most weeknights through the year? He's in the library. Oh, by the way, libraries are places where knowledge used to be stored in form of things called books. And there was no internet access at the time. So people get this misunderstanding, even going back to envy, that people who have acquired things academically must have done so by some kind of robbery, again, or favoritism or racism. And this wokeism is what's driving us, quite frankly, to destruction and needs to be combated in this war on prosperity that we're talking about. But the young people, or even older people at university today, are convinced we have to be overthrown. Not dealt with in open debate, not convinced in the great theater of ideas. We have to be violently thrown out. And you can see it in the manifestation of the types of protests that have been going on related to Israel. Now's the time I can plug my documentary. A few months ago, it's kind of a long story, but Jewish groups that I meet with often in Toronto, and very influential Jewish groups, and in the U.S., very concerned, not just, of course, of what happened October 7th, but the fact that there's so little protest, just saying whatever your whole picture is on the Palestinian issue, people just condemning that was wrong. And so I was asked and funded, frankly, by some good folks in the Jewish community in Toronto, and by a television station in the U.S. to go do a documentary. And it's on about October 7th. It's called Israel, Lessons Learned. And it basically breaks it down. It gives people talking points based on the truth. And it came from the cry and the request from Jewish groups across the country who were saying, where are the Christians? Where are the Christians? We thought they were for us, but we don't hear from them. And there's a particularly poignant interview. And anyway, we did the documentary. The IDF was great. They got us into the conflict zones on the southern border, the northern border. We were in the Knesset. We were interviewed with key members of the Knesset. I had closed-door meetings with people in the securities and intelligence community, many of whom I knew from my days of public safety minister and was working with them. Anyway, one of the most poignant interviews at the Hadassah Hospital, where there's 5,000 healthcare practitioners working, Christians, Muslims, Jews, all working together. The woman who is the head of gynecology, and for years has been head of their sexual violence department, and she's a top surgeon. with tears in her eyes as she was describing the fact that from that morning, from that music conference, as the helicopters started bringing them in some cases it was hard to determine whether the victim whose life they were trying to save was male or female. And just let me leave the details at that. But she looks into the camera and she says, where are the feminists? Where are the women's groups? And people will automatically be saying, well, of course, she's a Jewish doctor, and so and she ends her interview with me by saying, I am a Muslim. And so these groups in Canada that we're meeting with were saying, we're the Christians. And I know many of you are there on the issues, but many of us are not. And church leaders included, and I'll come to that in our strategy session here. So check that out, stockwellday.com. If you go there, it's my website, and up on the banner you'll see you'll see Stockwell Day, day-to-day show, something like that, S-Day. Just click on that. It's there. It's also on YouTube. Very interesting, and I've broken it into 4 episodes so it's digestible. YouTube is they didn't quite ban it, but they took one of the episodes and they said, we're putting an age restriction on this. So kids under 18 don't see it. When I think of what kids can watch on YouTube today. So anyway, there's opposition everywhere, but check that out, and please feel free to use it. You can't sell it, you can't market it, but those who sponsored this have said, please have people use this. If it can be one of a number of things to help sort of tip the tide. And so we think, well, the great hope that we've got from governments or from policies which impede our freedoms or allow people to take things from us, including our kids, the wonderful thing is we have democracy. And that was one of the, of course, driving movements for democracy, is that with the people being able to speak, we would prevent then these pillaging governments from taking our stuff. And John Stuart Mill, who I admire many of his writings and there we go. Okay, look at that guy. Many of his policies. Now, that's good. There's the episodes. Okay, do I need to go back, Dave, on this to get? Okay. So I want to get to the next slide. It's a quote from John Stuart Mill, and he's talking about the great promoter of democracy, whose writings were foundational. Okay, here we go. Beautiful what he said here. In a democracy, the people must have that kind of freedom which consists in the ability to discuss and deliberate upon every aspect of public affairs. He said this was, of course, instrumental to democracy. Without this freedom, that's the freedom to discuss. He's not even saying, though he talks about freedom, without this freedom, democracy is but a hollow shell. If we don't have the freedom to discuss without worrying about triggering somebody's emotion, then democracy itself becomes a hollow shell. And, we say, well, fear of what do you got to worry about in a beautiful country like Canada? It's mainly the fear of loss. Loss of what? Loss of livelihood, loss of position, loss of reputation. If you speak on these issues, and did you ever dream, if I was standing on a microphone here 5 years ago and said, we're going to there's going to be a day when teachers are going to be actively recruiting kids as under 16 or 12 or 13 to have their genitals altered either physically or pharmaceutically or chemically. First, you would have thrown me out of the room 5 years ago. You said, that is never happening. And secondly, if I'd said, and parents will be afraid and teachers will be afraid to speak out about it, you would say, you've really lost it. You're one of these conspiracy group people. Isn't it amazing how so many of the so-called conspiracies that a number of us were talking about 10 or 15 years ago have all come to fruition? But the media isn't saying, oh, sorry, you were right. Because they don't like using the word right, because that's got a political connotation. So we're afraid, even when it comes to issues like gender, certainly on COVID, certainly on climate, to speak up because we could lose. The attack mechanism of mainstream media is so vicious and so instant. I know this personally. Right at the height of cancel culture in Canada, it still exists, is very strong, but as it was peaking, within 1 week, people like as a disparate group as Wendy Medsley, who she and I, as you remember, famous anchor for CBC, we disagree probably on most things, but we agree on some things. She got canceled, lost everything. Very famous person, one of the Mulroney, in the Mulroney family, who was in media, boom, canceled. I got canceled. Those type of things, in my case, and I'm not whining here, but, okay, I'm whining. When things like that happen, those are multi-million-dollar hits on your livelihood and your projected livelihood. So I don't blame doctors, or teachers or others. I'm not saying blame, but I understand their fear. It's instant loss of livelihood, loss of reputation when you stand up and speak up on these things. So fear of being canceled is what keeps people from speaking, and democracy is turning into a hollow shell. You say, well, it's not so much in Canada. Well, we've just heard great presentations this morning on how it is. And we got a little bill out here right now, as some of you would know. It's called the Online Harms Act. Isn't that a beautiful title? We are going to protect you from being harmed. As we've heard already this morning, that's always the underlining infrastructure that's to make us accepting of whatever it is. It's bad enough to say we're from the government and we're here to help you, which is one of the scariest things you'll ever hear. But now, and it's to keep you safe. The Online Harms Act, as some of you know, and I was just involved with a discussion group on this 2 days ago. Do you know there's written in that legislation is going to limit very severely whether you can even talk about, for instance, energy issues, oil and gas, climate change. You are going to have to come up with peer-studied reviews and reports, not just that, but those studies have been adjudicated by a government-appointed board that says that scientific group that studied it, we approve of them. So now you can say that thing without being charged, fined, or even jailed. This is Canada. This is now. It's happening. And because of the vote structure in the House of Commons, it will become law. Unless something, completely unforeseen happens, it will become law. This is the type of thing that we're facing. And never mind that. That's just on oil and gas. You talk about the gender issues. You talk about health issues. We are being constrained almost beyond belief. So what we do is, some of us, naively, we fall back and we say, well, but we're protected, freedom of discussion. I'm just talking about freedom of discussion now. I believe in freedom of speech too, but I'm trying to soften it. There's people now who literally trigger when you use the word freedom of speech. And our universities across Canada and the U.S. are telling students freedom of speech is just a dog whistle for racism. And so even freedom of speech doesn't carry a lot of water. So I'm saying freedom of discussion. But we always have felt, and again, going back to some of Mill's writing and others, harm. As long as you're not harming me, you're free to talk and do what you want. And as was famously quoted, that stops. Your freedom to wave your fist in my face stops at the tip of my nose. In other words, I might not like what you're doing, but as long as you're not physically harming me, you're allowed to do it. But we've gone way past that. What has happened is the other side has now redefined harm. It's been redefined. So if somebody, as we've seen, and I just saw a clip, real thing, a woman had called the police, she was convulsing, she could hardly stand up. and wanted the police to interfere on her neighbors. Do you know what the neighbors are doing? They were barbecuing. And the double effect of a cow being barbecued and possible fumes had triggered her to the place where she was so harmed, the police had to arrive and do an investigation on the neighbors because of the harm. Here's, I kind of like this here. I'm going to read this to you. Now, there's a little kid, and he's completely flummoxed. He's sad. He's got his hands like, what do I do now? And if you can read it, it says, our grandparents, they're talking to this, look at, your grandparents told you no for the first time in your life, and now you don't know if you'll ever recover. And folks, and I got grandkids, but this is where we're at. The other side, the combatants, the belligerents, have redefined what harm is. So we will, in this room, almost always be guilty of inflicting harm on somebody by the things we say. We're in very, very difficult territory. And as we look at the art of war, probably one of the most discouraging things in terms of us, and those of you who are familiar with Sun Tzu and what he says here, the highest form of warfare, the highest form. Oh, I'm going to go back one. There we go. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. And largely, folks, other than good people like you and other pockets, around the world, the other side is winning without fighting. Because we've been so subdued out of fear and lack of understanding of the rightness of our own position that we're not in the fight. We're just not there. Again, present company accepted. This is a very unsettling place to be. That the other side is winning and we're not. Largely, we're not fighting. We're being subdued. Present company accepted, of course. So, what do we do? And we ask ourselves the question. I'm going to try and wrap up the strategy portion here in 4 minutes, so we can go to the Q&A. There's a great line. Anybody seen that? One of the greatest sort of crime mafia movies, The Untouchables, the one with Kevin Costner and Sean Connery. If you haven't, and then this is not a shot for or against prohibition, but their goal, the head of the FBI at the time, Alan Ness, his goal was to take out Al Capone. But it looked impossible, and at the start of the movie, Sean Connery confronts him. Sean Connery's a beat cop. And he says to him, what are you prepared to do? Or what are you prepared to do? I can't look like Sean Connery, neither can I sound like him. And he weighs out the consequences. Is he willing to pay the price? And near the end of the movie, though you've seen it, Sean Connery actually gets ambushed. And he gets blown to pieces. And in his dying moments, Elliot Ness finds him. He comes running up and he says, oh, no, this wasn't supposed to happen. No. And Sean Connery, it's a ghastly scene, but it's a great scene. He looks up and he says, what are you prepared to do? And then he dies. But what are you prepared to do? What are we prepared to do? I know you in this room, you're prepared to do things, and you have done things. But the battle isn't over, and the cost is going to have to continue to be paid. Some great strategies, and I want to talk about some of these here. And if I can just find, I'll go to the next one here. Already we've heard some this morning, and they kind of, let me go through these quickly. By the way, keep in mind, as we know, silence is consent. That's always how it's determined. In a caucus meeting, I can tell you, provincially or federally, the leader will look around the room when an issue comes up, and he'll say or she'll say, any of you been here, to the MLAs or the MPs, any of you been hearing anything about this? Whatever the issue is. If there's silence, then the government thinks we're good to go, and away they go. So these little methods that you heard about this morning, a little phone call, a comment, a review section, an op-ed, they make a difference. We need to keep that in mind. Focus on candidate meetings, small and large. I'm not going to take the time to go into the detail there. We saw some brilliant strategy. Those are so important. And many times, folks, people are hearing these truths for the first time. And truth, the wonderful thing about truth, it does set people free. When I say to people, Hamas does not want to negotiate peace. They have two things written in their charter. One, kill all Jews all the time everywhere. And two, annihilate Israel. And people go, no. And I go, it's written. It's there for you to say, and they articulate it on television, especially in Europe, all the time. So the truth, these candidate meetings where people are presented with these points are very important. At the municipal level, very important. We're dealing at the municipal level. People have learned, the left has learned, that municipalities can vote in things that have nothing to do with their mandate, but it can become trend-setting and then sweep across the country. Very important that you are talking to or presenting yourselves to municipal candidates to expose what they're talking about, be it good or evil. School boards, the same. And yes, you're going to be called names, and you go and you bring up the gender issues, you're going to be called all kinds of things, but you need to do it. I'll make a little prediction here. The great sleeper issue for voters today, and at least for the next few years, is the gender issue. People are terrified to speak openly about it. Pierre Poilievre had this is one example of a meeting on Vancouver Island. There were so many people trying to get to the meeting, they had to close down the highway. It was in Duncan. And I got emails from people in the teaching community, people in the medical community, saying we are terrified to speak out. But what we heard tonight, we are swinging our support to Pierre Poilievre. He's speaking for us. That was teachers. I'm telling you, they're terrified to speak out. So you need to go to the school boards and raise these issues. The thing about handouts, we heard that. We didn't compare notes here, but a piece of paper cannot be as easily removed as something on the internet. Clear, concise points, giving talking points to people. Corporations. Corporations need to be asked in a public way through a presentation. Maybe you write a letter and you name the corporation's name, call it such and such a phone company. You pick the name, tell us, it doesn't matter. And ask, are you aware that you are promoting policies that are harmful to children? And start hitting and bringing the points down to where it's real and to where it's true. TikTok. Anybody here on TikTok? Okay, 2 of you. That's 3 counting me as of 3 weeks ago. Because my grandkids are on it all the time. I go, okay, what is this? I get on there. I love TikTok. It is so amazingly curated to the things that I like to look at. It gives me, I can go on there anytime my wife says, you got to get off TikTok. I'm saying to my grandkids, you got to get off TikTok. The scripture verses I like, the songs I like, the political opinions I like, the humor that I like. It's fantastic. I think one of the reasons, I don't know, I know there's the Chinese element behind it. I think one of the key drivers about political parties here, though, wanting to see it shut down, is because you do get different points of view politically on this, and you get great information. But we need to be, with people like us, with our views, need to be on TikTok. Most kids, CBC doesn't have to worry that they're going to offend young people. See, young people never watch it. I don't mean sometimes, I mean never. Mainstream media, they're just not there. Churches, very important, and I understand pastors and reverends and ministers don't want to be seen to be involved, quote, politically. But they not only have the right, but they should exercise the right to at least share with their people what the different points of view are. Even better than that, on a Wednesday night, let's say, bring the candidates in. Because the candidates, I'm glad you like that idea. I've been in politics. If I can speak to a crowd of more than, well, let's say 2 people, I'm there. And especially if I think I can get one of them to vote for me. You tell the candidates, there'll be 150 of us, or there'll be 20 of us, and it'll be an open session. We're just getting the candidates' view. The pastor or the church does not even have to take a position. Just stand up. Matter of fact, on that issue, I've been saying to my colleagues, and I have great communication when we're doing a bunch of strategic stuff with political parties. I say, listen, Just invite a Liberal MP or the Liberal candidate to go with you to any mosque in the country. And when it's your time to speak, just say to the Liberal candidate, could you please explain Justin Trudeau's policy on gender and gender change for children? Let him talk. Be ready, by the way, to protect him physically, but just let him or her talk. Candidates need to be taken into account, as we saw in that video. Do you believe this? Whatever the issue is, do you believe this? They need to be publicly known for that. And op-eds and comments. Can all of this make a difference? Can reaching out and getting to political leaders really make a difference? Well, I believe it can. We're going to look at something that shows it can. But folks, our policies benefit people. As many of you know, when I had the honor of being Minister of Finance for Ralph Klein, we brought in Canada's first, I think still only, ready for the word, brace yourself, don't throw stuff at me, flat tax, there I said it really quickly, or single rate tax. I Googled just the other day, I wanted, because I know it's a beneficial thing, and the NDP got rid of it. Of course, it's based on envy. And I Googled ChatGPT and said, are there any instances in Canada of a flat tax, and was it successful? And hey, Chat talked about me. Glad some people don't mind talking about me. And they said, well, it's basically said, yeah, okay, there was some kind of uptick in economic activity in the out years. But the flat tax can't, I mean, there are resources in Alberta. Folks, you know what? There's resources in Quebec. There's resources in Ontario. But if you mismanage the resources, you're going to have to tax people more. And that's what's happening. So we need to be disrupting the narrative. Bob Ray is a friend of mine, but I don't mind saying publicly, and I've said it before, Bob Ray's NDP economic policies destroyed Ontario and hurt all of Canada through what happened with interest rates because of how he plunged that. Media never talk about that. We have to be outspoken and speaking up and saying these type of things, how people are truly getting hurt. Can we win? Well, Dave, can you play that clip? Now, this was last night. I was just going over my notes, and I flicked on the news after I'd spent some time on TikTok. And now this is mainstream media, and there is no negative or positive inflection. The reason I'm keeping this is because it's one of the rare times I just saw some straight up reporting, and they didn't go negative, they didn't go positive, they did what journalists and media should do. So this was last night on a mainstream media television channel. Is it possible for leaders to hear what concerns us? Take a listen here.
One, but three events.
The Honorable Pierre Poilievre. Praise the Lord. Would you stand? Hallelujah.
Pierre Poilievre was in church last Sunday, not just one, but three evangelical churches, where he was greeted as a political savior.
And I'm believing God that the next Prime Minister will be the one to turn things around.
Amen.
Poilievre spread the conservative gospel.
The good news is, Canada, our home, was not like this before Justin Trudeau, and it won't be like it after he's gone.
The media is not invited to these events, but a speech posted online by one of the churches shows Poilievre saying the same kinds of things he says at any political rally or in Parliament.
We need to become the freest country on earth, free, where you are free to speak your mind, to raise your children with your own values on matters of gender and sexuality.
But visiting evangelical churches is a groundbreaker for a Canadian political leader.
The trick is to do that without being tarred with the brush that you are an extremist, that you're a, American-style Christian right ideologue, which I think is toxic in Canadian politics.
Even Stephen Harper, who was himself a member of an evangelical church, thought close associations with evangelicals might be a political liability.
I would say that there's some truth to that.
Andrew Enns was Harper's pollster and says Poilievre's breaking of this political taboo is significant.
It tells us that he's fairly comfortable and he's feeling fairly confident right now that he's got a message that Canadians, doesn't matter where they are, they're reacting well to.
Evangelicals at the elite level are a really important part of the conservative infrastructure. So if you look at Poilievre's his own mentors, people like Stockwell Day Sr., Preston Manning, so he is not himself an evangelical, but he's surrounded by people who are.
And these visits are important to religious groups like Cardis, a nonpartisan Christian think tank.
One thing that Christians, and particularly evangelicals, but Christians in general in Canada, I think are wanting right now is a little show of support for a community that has seen, I think, significant restrictions of their freedoms.
And evangelical Christians are not the political power here that they are in the United States. Here, they make up between 5 and 15% of the electorate, but they are all in on Poilievre. An Angus Reid Institute poll from April found that 75% of those who identify as evangelical are ready to vote Conservative versus just 5% who would vote for Justin Trudeau's Liberals. Donna.
Interesting. David Aiken in Ottawa, thank you.
Possible to get our message through. Does that mean that Pierre Poilievre is an evangelical Christian? No, and he has never said that. And people who, and by the way, I know this is non-political, this event. I'm just showing you what effort can take place when somebody hears things that are truthful and they're courageous. So Pierre hears certain things, he analyzes them. If there's truth to them, he's going to speak up on them. And he's not worried as other political leaders may be. You may not like Pierre, blame me. I'm the guy who brought him to Ottawa, as you know. He used to work for me, used to be my assistant. And thank goodness he hardly listened to anything I said because he's gone on to be successful. But I'm showing you this to show that what? That somehow evangelicals can rule? No, that it's possible that we could get back to the day where we'd allow the human freedom to discuss. And that's called headway, and you're part of it. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Stockwell. If you have some questions, we've got a few minutes for questions. I don't think it's necessarily political to tell the truth, and I mean, you did a nice job of that, and thank you for doing that. And it's just, I think Pierre's doing that, and I think one of the things as a group we've prided ourselves in, for the 4 years that Rachel Notley was the premier, we invited her to come to our conference every time. And to her credit, she always wrote back a real nice, thank you very much for inviting me, but I haven't got time. But some people said, what are you going to do if she comes? He said, we'll treat her with respect. We'll ask her some questions. So that's what we try to do. Dr. Hodgkinson, go ahead.
I'm going to make some very political statements. Excellent presentation.
Started it, yeah. Go ahead.
Excellent presentation. Essentially what you were saying was we need bottom up. I would also say that we need top down. There needs to be the emergence of a leader, a René Lévesque type, an Alberta Trump, to unite the right and lead the charge for independence for this province. Any attempt to work with Ottawa is guaranteed to fail. What the truckers started and led to an international movement could result in the freest, most prosperous place on earth, not just for Albertans, but as an example for the rest of the world to follow how to reinvent those traditional democratic freedoms. That is what's needed, and if we don't get a charismatic leader, we're pissing up a wall. Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't sense a question there, but I'm happy to support your right to express that, and it's a great thing to be discussing. By the way, that topic is a constant topic of discussion in Alberta, and I'm glad we have the freedom to discuss that. Shauna.
Hi, Stockwell. You touched on several important things, but one of the things I think we need to address is that people who united to fight for freedom over the last several years are finding their freedom to speak being taken away by a general consensus that if you don't like it, just go buy it. And I've seen things like anti-Semitism growing in freedom groups. So can you maybe address the fact that we need to fight that war internally as well as externally about addressing bad issues by learning to speak up instead of suppress them?
Important question and topic. I think I've addressed a significant part of that in my comments. When it comes right down to it, I have to come back, Shauna, and as you do, and you're a great champion of this, what are you prepared to do? Are you prepared to speak up, take the hits? One of the, a quote I remember from a book David Frum wrote, it was actually about George Bush, and the book's called The Right Man. Near the end of the book, and David Frum was prescient in this, because it was years ago he wrote this, and he talked about in his own life where he would be marginalized, either as a Jew or as a person who had small c conservative philosophy. You'd be marginalized. And so what do? Do you risk being marginalized, or do you speak up? And he basically said, speak the truth and pay the price. And really, that's the answer, folks. Speak the truth and pay the price.
One more question. Go ahead, Ian.
Mr. Day, Ian McCormack. Silence is consent. For 6 years, the Bank Act was changed. 3 years ago, it was readable in the clear. Bank Act Article 21. When will a federal MP actually tell us about the revolution? A true Leninist communist will always say, the issue of today is not the issue. The issue is the revolution. According to what I understand, the revolution is the Bank Act. Could you one day elaborate on Article 21?
The Bank Act is actually, like most legislation today, first of all, it's on its own merits. It should be discussed and should be talked about. It is written in a way where it is almost unintelligible, as most laws now increasingly are. And we are at a situation now where you can be, I'm not saying this, there's not conspiracy stuff, income tax law, for instance, going in line with is written in such a way now where you can be charged and arrested and found guilty of almost anything in terms of your income tax. It is so complex and so complicated. But with what you just said, we have to get back to the place where we have the freedom to discuss it. Because I can tell you with the Online Harms Act, there will be aspects of what our speaker just said here. I think I have a sense of where he's coming from on the Bank Act, and I would agree with him on a lot of that stuff. If he gets up and really articulates that, he has the risk of being, under this new act, he has the risk of being arrested, of being charged. And I think we're going to cut it off now, sir, so I just want to close with this thing. It's this the willingness to speak and pay the price. And you know, what media can't understand is it does happen. There actually are times where you can say something, I can say something to Danny back and forth here, where we are completely opposed, but we don't call for the other one to be arrested. Now you say, well, that's between you and Danny, so that's within a certain more confined area. I had the honor about 3 years ago to be invited by the Dalai Lama to go to his, in northern India, where he lives with his government in exile from Tibet, and very concerned about the inroads China has made into Tibet. And he wanted to pull together, there was no media, there were media there, but nobody was allowed to publicize this. He just wanted strategic advice on what he as a leader could do vis-a-vis China and Tibet. Well, I was thrilled to go, it was great. So, I mean, picture this, Danny, here we are, he's the head of a worldwide religious movement, and myself, we're on the stage together after 3 days of people talking about and meeting and discussing strategies and presenting to him and to all the monks that were there for consideration. And the Dalai Lama, by the way, is a very practical guy, very down to earth in many ways. And I was able to sit there on stage and say, you know, the Dalai Lama and I disagree on some things. For instance, I believe that Jesus Christ is Lord of the universe, and the Dalai Lama does not. And I paused. I said, but as you can see, his people did not rush me on the stage. he didn't try and hurt me. We recognize we have a difference, and we work together on the things we agreed on. I speak in many synagogues. Great honor to do. Speaking at one not that long ago, and the rabbis had gathered from the area. I was about to speak, and it was government and politically related. And the head rabbi said, you know, Mr. Dave, we have some differences. Okay, sorry, I'm not a very good impression of, but that was his accent. I said, yes, Rabbi, I know that. He said, you know, we even disagree on who is the Messiah. I said, yes, Rabbi, we do. He said, I see it like this. When Messiah returns, he will tell us who is right and who is wrong. I said, you know what, Rabbi, I'm totally good with that. But I want you to think for a minute, because media does not think it's possible for people to have strong differences and articulate them and peace to continue. That rabbi said to me he did not believe. He thought, he said he believes I'm wrong and who the Messiah is. And I'm saying I believe he's wrong. And we link arms and we work together on stuff that we do agree on. And that's what media needs to be convinced about. And I'll close with this. When I was Minister of Public Safety and doing some terrorism-related stuff in Saudi Arabia, meeting with the members of the royal family there, and there is stuff that we can communicate on and do things together with. And I broached this topic of freedom of religion with one of the heads of the royal family. We had a very good discussion for about 5 minutes. And then he said, we have to end this discussion. Because if the people, my people outside my office right now, even think we're talking about freedom of religion, they would kill me. And we've got to move past that, folks. I tried to convince them that if you have freedom of religion, freedom of discussion, you actually have more peace in your society than if you try and stomp out views you don't agree with. So this is what we have to be promoting, and thank you, Danny, for being part of that promotion.
And thank you. Let's give him a warm round of applause. Thank you very much, Stockwell. Thank you. It's truly that attitude that I think it's that attitude, and it's our choice, of course, and he's part of it, as are all of you folks, part of making that choice for late decline not to be our fate. Just before we go to break, I want to, in everybody's, when I was listening to our radical friend Ian talking about what was going on, I was thinking about our dear friend. In everybody's kit, they got a copy of the Constitution, and our friend Dale Wells is right here. Just put your hand up, Dale. Dale actually organized a group of us to work on that. We all met in Lloydminster for a weekend, I think, almost 2.5 years ago, but Dale did the finishing work. He got it all printed, and he's donated it for us here today. And he was in the room last night, and I was telling our friends, I said, we've been lifelong family friends, and I said, he's been talking crazy like this for 40 years, but I said, what worries me is it all keeps coming true, you know what I mean? So anyway, thank you, Dale, for donating those constitutions. In the back of the room, we have one of the other people that I really admired, of course, was Ted Byfield, and he said in the younger days, life was simple, because most people didn't go into politics till they got to be about 50 years old, and then they just put their name out there and they told people what they believed, and then you just voted for whoever believed whatever you believed. He said that was pretty simple, you know what I mean? But then we got into, this new modern era where we've got pollsters and everything, and rather than, politicians telling people what they believe, we've got the pollsters saying, well, this is what the people want you to believe, so we've got a whole group of people who are telling us what they think we believe, and so you actually don't know who to believe anymore. So I think all of this, I think the whole focus of what we're talking about here is telling the truth. And I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be having a thing on Sunday. John's going to be talking right here in this room about the power of telling the truth, and we're actually also going to have Paul Himmon's going to be speaking, and Maxime Bernier is going to be speaking. And I think Maxime Bernier just got here speaking of the power of telling. Stand up and say hello, Maxime. Hello, Maxime, and speak. So anyway, thank you. Maxime will be speaking tonight, and we have another group back in the corner. Vince Byfield is here with his group. They've got they're marketing some books. I guess it's the history of Christianity, isn't it? Or is that what you're marketing, Vince? Yes and no. Yes, he's marketing. He's a true Byfield. He's marketing a lot of things. Go ahead. Okay. Oh yeah, that's a good thing too. And so good. Thanks for coming. Yeah, he's got his. You can get some information back there. We've got. Good for you. Okay, let's, thank you very much. Thank you, Stockwell. That was an amazing talk. I mean, I was listening to, I really like your theme, Stockwell, and I was listening to one of Tucker Carlson's, he was speaking at a university, and you talk about politics, and he said, like, it's sort of got a bad name because of some of the people that we talk about and don't care that much for, but he said, generally speaking, he said, there's no happy Nirvana between politics and there's no happy Nirvana between politics and absolute all-out war. And so he said, when you say, well, we don't want politics, he said, it's not like there's just some other easy way of figuring it out. Politics is the process which civilized people have adopted so that we can live civilly together. And Stockwell, you touched on that too. Have a civil discussion, even with people that we disagree with. But if we get to where we can't have a civil discussion with those people, well then, quite frankly, everybody gets their guns and we get right back to, who was the guy, the axe, the Greek guy with the axe killing everybody that John was talking about earlier. Yes. Nadine Wellwood just came up. She's got the 1905 project, which I haven't read it. I heard about it and said they're a flat tax group. I hope they want our taxes to go down, but if you'll just check with Nadine, she's got a table over there. She'd be happy to talk to you about it. So let's take a break. We'll come back. I think, is Michelle Sterling on after? I think Michelle Sterling. Yeah, Michelle Sterling. So I think I've used about 5 minutes of your 20-minute break. So grab a coffee, go to the washroom. We'll be back to listen to Michelle. Thank you, everyone.